Come with me now. Go with me now. I'm gonna take you down. Go with me now. I'm gonna show you how. Go with me now.
All right, so we're back. This is Unit 2, Lesson 2, called Restrictions on Free Trade. So to review, anybody remember why Barbie comes from China? Or why Papa John's gets his tomatoes from Mexico? What's that, Steve? You have an answer? That is correct. It is comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is the reason why these things happen. So if you'll recall, comparative advantage is a situation in which an individual, group, country, firm, entity of whatever has a lower opportunity cost in the production of some good. Okay? So, comparative advantage allows us to specialize and then trade with other countries. And that's where we get this term called globalization. So, is globalization for real? Is it that big of a deal? Well, it turns out it is. 25% of our GDP is based upon world trade. I'm sorry, world GDP. 25% of it is based on world trade. Okay? Many of the goods, I would say it's almost, well, it's probably not most, but a large quantity of the goods we purchase in the United States are imported from other countries. In fact, I would venture to guess that anything you pick up, it's going to say made in China. That's right. So the iPhone, for example, designed by Apple in California, but it's put together in China. And so the item and all of its inputs are shipped thousands of miles before you actually get them. Okay? Why is this the case? Well, over the years, there's been a reduction in transportation costs. A lot of this is brought about by technology. Okay? And that has allowed countries to increasingly specialize, meaning, you know, China, great example, they specialize in electronic consumer goods. Okay? So here's some trends in world trade. If you go back to the dawn of man right here, 1970, that's the year of my birth. The value of world trade, you know, just exports, was less than $2 trillion. Today it's over 14 trillion. Okay, so it's gone up substantially. Okay, check that as a percentage of GDP in the world. It was around 11%. Today it's around 25%. So trade has become increasingly more important to all of us. So let's talk about some definitions. When we talk about a trade balance, all we're doing here is we're taking our exports, we're subtracting our imports, and that gives us what is known as the trade balance, or the balance on trade. All right? If that balance ends up being positive, you have what's called a trade surplus. So if exports minus imports equals a positive number, we have a surplus. And we would have a trade deficit anytime our exports minus our imports gives you a negative number. Now, interesting factoid, the United States has had a trade deficit every year since 1975. Okay? So, and by the way, it is substantial. It's $1 trillion. So essentially our entire economy is around $19 trillion. So almost 5% of our economy is imports. Now, if we didn't import those, it wouldn't subtract from our economy. But at the same time, if we produced everything here, our economy wouldn't be 18 or $19 trillion anyway. It would be some number smaller. So as a percentage of our GDP, okay, imports right here, exports right here, when you combine them, trade is still very important to us. Okay, using the definitions we just covered, this period of time involves trade deficits. This period over here has some surpluses. Okay, and I think that's good. We'll move on. So imports and exports have both increased significantly over the last 50 years. One of the reasons our economy is the world's largest, so we buy a lot of stuff from the world. We also are capable of making a lot of things. Okay, so our exports and our imports have naturally increased. We are also becoming more interconnected with other economies. Okay. As mentioned before, since 1975, our imports have been greater than our exports every single year, and that trade deficit is fairly significant. Business cycles affect our trade. All right, a business cycle is just the ups and downs in economic activity, and part of the business cycle would be a recession. The good part of the business cycle is expansion. During recessions, we tend to buy less from other countries. Other countries also tend to buy less from us, so our imports and our exports both drop. Okay. Now what we're going to do now is look at our major trading partners. Okay. There's a misconception out there that says China is our #1 biggest trade partner. They're not really. They are our largest importing partner, so we import more from them than the world, but they're not our most important trading partner. That distinction goes to Canada. Okay, Canada is our most important trade partner simply because they import more from us and they export more to us. And so if you take that volume and add them together, they are our most important trading partner. One of the reasons for that is this trade deal called NAFTA. Okay, NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement signed in 1992. It eliminated trade restrictions among those three countries. So when we talk about trade restrictions, we're talking about tariffs or quotas, for example. We'll talk about those in a second. You should also be aware of a trade organization called the WTO. This is the World Trade Organization. It's not a specific trade agreement, but more of a network and sort of an overall agreement to trade. And what it does is it reduces tariffs worldwide, and the WTO acts as a referee. So when countries have trade disputes, the WTO steps in and they try to resolve those disputes. Okay, looking back at the US and our trading partners, this is why Canada is our #1 trading partner. Our total trade with them is $616 billion. China's right behind them. I wouldn't be surprised if by the time in the next couple of years, China could be up there. All right. And then Canada, China, Mexico, those are our top 3. If you look at trade as a percentage of GDP for the major countries of the world, you can see that many countries rely more on trade than many other countries. So for example, in the US, if you look at the percentage of our GDP that is imports and exports, okay, on both sides here, we would be less affected by a decrease in trade than these other countries. Okay, these other countries, if trade didn't exist, their GDPs would fall precipitously. I mean, it'd be rough. If you look at Hong Kong, for example, okay, their GDP is highly dependent upon trade. If they didn't have trade, they would be a very poor country. All right, so here's why we trade. Okay, there are advantages. Okay, economies of scale. What are those? It allows you, when you specialize in what you're best at, it allows you to buy the inputs that go into production at a lower cost because you're buying in bulk. Okay, it also gives small countries access to more technical goods that they otherwise wouldn't be able to produce, and it basically allows those small countries to specialize and then trade with other countries. Okay, it also provides competition. Competition's important because it gives lower prices and greater selection. So let's look at an example of why we would trade. So here is the market graph for shoes in the United States. If we don't trade with other countries, the price of shoes is $140. If we do trade with other countries, our supply curve is going to shift to the right, and you're going to see that shoe prices are going to fall. Okay, that's good. In addition, you're going to have more selection in the types of shoes that you can buy. All right. So that's the good part. You also have the bad part. Okay, some local producers of shoes aren't going to be able to compete, and they'll probably go out of business. Okay, so that's the harm that tariffs cause. So some local producers are harmed. How do we solve that? Well, I'm not prescribing a solution for that. I'm telling you what the solution that governments have put in place. Okay, they've put in place tariffs as a means of protecting those jobs. In this case, from the shoe industry losses, protecting them from foreign competition. There are two types of tariffs. The protective tariff is the one we just described. It's a tariff, and by the way, a tariff is a tax on an imported good. Okay? But a protective tariff is a tax that is so high that it actually eliminates the importation of those products. Okay? Once you add the tax, the product is so expensive that nobody's going to buy it. And so it, in effect, protects domestic industry from foreign competition. Then you have what's called the revenue tariff. Okay, this is not a restriction on free trade. A revenue tariff is just designed to raise money. Okay, so this tariff would be relatively small, and the purpose of it is to raise money for the government. All right, now let's look at Haiti and Cuba. You'll recall them from last class. If you look at Haiti and Cuba, the price of coffee in Haiti is $3. And the price of bread in Cuba is also $3. Okay? But because Cuba can make coffee at a lower cost, they could sell some of their coffee in Haiti. If they did that, we would expect the supply of coffee in Haiti to increase, and then the price of coffee would drop. Okay, similar situation happens in Cuba. Since Haiti can produce bread at a lower cost, they could sell some of their bread in Cuba, increasing the supply of bread in Cuba and lowering the price of bread in Cuba. Okay, so that's the good part of free trade. Here's the bad part. All right, if Haitians begin selling bread in Cuba, what happens to all of these bakers? Okay, these are the bakers in Cuba. They're protesting. They're protesting because a lot of them are going to lose their jobs because of the competition. Similar thing here. These are coffee makers in Haiti. Okay, they're protesting because they can't compete with Cuban coffee, and some of them will lose their jobs. And so the governments respond and put in place a tariff. So if we go back to where we ended, okay, maybe coffee in Haiti was now selling at $2.50. Bread in Cuba is selling at $2.50. But because of the tariff, you're going to see a decrease in the supply of coffee in Haiti, and so the price is going to go higher. You're going to see a decrease in the supply of bread in Cuba, and again the price is going to go higher. So the tariffs result in higher prices, less selection. Now, how much does the tariff have to be? Well, it depends, but let's say that coffee makers in Cuba said, screw you, Haiti, we're still going to sell our coffee over there. Well, if they make the tariff as high as $1, then the coffee goes from $2 cost to $3 cost, and at that point they wouldn't be able to make a profit by selling it in Haiti. So I would say the tariff has to be at least $1. All right, so what do tariffs do? Well, they decrease supply, so they're going to make prices go higher. Okay, there's also going to be less purchases of those goods. Excuse me. It also costs foreign producers because they're not going to sell as much. Okay, and then lastly, it isolates you as a nation. What's a quota? A quota is a limit on the quantity that can be imported into a country. So quotas actually do the same thing as a tariff, except there's no tax. Okay? No tax. But what do they end up doing? They decrease supply and they raise prices. Okay? So that's what's going to happen here. Now, why would a tariff or a quota be put in place? Well, the reason for trade barriers are multifaceted. Okay, one of them is basically just political. Okay, there could be political reasons. Okay, we have an election this year. Actually, both candidates have come out opposed in large part to free trade. Okay, both of them are against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example. And the reason for that is special interests, lobbying, or irrational ignorance. Or actually, they're not ignorant. They're just trying to get people to vote for them. Okay? Here's probably a pretty good reason here is national security. This is the F-35 fighter. Now, would it make sense for us to let China build those for us? Okay, I'm hoping you say no, that wouldn't make sense. All right, here's a third argument: infant industry. If you go back and look at our history, in the 1800s we had really high tariffs on imported goods, and the purpose of those tariffs was to help our basic, early industry, get a foothold and take off. Okay, we wouldn't have been able to compete with the prices of British goods if we had not had a tariff, and then we might not have ever developed an industrial base. So that's the third argument. So these second two arguments, they're probably legitimate economic, political concerns. The first one, not so much. Okay. So what I want to do is just show you the ramifications of a tariff. All right, let's say we put in place a tariff on sugar. What that's going to do is reduce the supply of sugar and therefore raise the price of sugar. So far so good, right? I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the 1950s, the largest purchasers of sugar in the world were Pepsi and Coke. Well, as a result of higher sugar prices, they couldn't buy as much sugar, and so they couldn't produce as many soft drinks. So the supply of soft drinks was affected, price goes higher. Now, Coke and Pepsi did not just say, okay, we're going to have to pay higher prices. They decided to come up with an alternative to sugar, which was corn syrup. Okay, so as a result, the demand for corn syrup and therefore corn increased, which means the price of corn went higher. As a result of that, the supply of Doritos decreased because the input towards Doritos, which is corn, went up in price, so you can't buy as much corn, therefore you can't make as many Doritos. That means tortillas also. All right, so the net effect is this: tariffs, whenever they're put in place, they cause prices to go higher. They don't just affect the single market that the tariff is imposed on. They affect multiple markets. Okay, it's like when you throw a rock in a lake. It creates ripples. So the ripple effect is that a tariff affects multiple industries, and it affects multiple people, and it affects them in an adverse way that maybe you didn't intend. So, concluding, if you look at our past 50-year history, imports, exports are higher. All right, we've proven through this lesson and last lesson that trade creates value based on comparative advantage. Okay, we've also proven that barriers to trade are going to exist for political or economic reasons, but they all result in higher prices, and they're actually disappearing worldwide. One of the reasons we have that WTO in the news right now, Trans-Pacific Partnership. So a lot of these things are happening to reduce tariffs.